And the movie is out in public at this moment. Do you think that is it part of the foreign policy with nuclear bomb, like from the United States?
Well, it's being written about everywhere. You know, two movies came out the same day: Barbie, about the doll, and Oppenheimer. And there, a lot of people, they're told people to go see them both. Go see Oppenheimer first because it's so, in some ways, depressing and sobering, and then go see Barbie because it's happy and uplifting. Um, so it is being discussed. I don't, you know, and it's maybe it's having some impact
Mhm.
on the foreign policy community, not enough. And the reviews have been very positive, with a few exceptions, but for the most part, very positive. And some of them are talking about the current situation, not as much as they need to. The United States and all 8 other nuclear powers are modernizing their nuclear arsenals, making them more efficient and more lethal. Some countries like Britain and China are growing their nuclear arsenals. You know, the United States alleges that China is going to go from 200 nuclear bombs that it had a couple of years ago now to 400. And by 2035, China is going to have 1,500. The Chinese don't acknowledge that, but that's the U.S. military projection. You know, and the world is very dangerous. The United States is fighting a two-front Cold War now. Russia and Ukraine, on one hand, Russia, the other hand, China.
Mm.
And many people fear that the danger of war is greatest over Taiwan. You know, and the Pentagon has run 18 war games between the United States and China over Taiwan, and China has won all 18. So would the U.S. use tactical nuclear weapons there? Will South Korea and Japan come to Taiwan's defense? Will Biden, as he says, send troops there if China tries to take Taiwan militarily? Will Xi Jinping, who thinks of this as an important part of his legacy, invade Taiwan? You know, these are all up in the air, very dangerous, really potentially terrifying. So we have to deal with those realities, or those potential realities. And it's not being discussed enough.
Okay. And what kind of effect do you think that the film uh, has on the world, like the overall?
I was very glad to hear that it's being shown and discussed in Vietnam.
Mhm.
I think it's being shown and discussed in many parts of the world. I was just at a conference in Italy, and some of the people there from other countries have seen it, have watched it, and we're talking about it. So it's being shown in much of Europe, much of the world. I hope it will get shown in Japan.
Mm.
We need a global discussion because the world population, most countries support the Treaty for the Prevention of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW at the United Nations, but none of the 9 nuclear powers have signed on to that. None of the 9 nuclear powers look like they're ready to give up nuclear weapons. And in fact, we're going the opposite direction. Nuclear weapons are becoming a more important part of the arsenals and the strategy of the nuclear powers. Biden in the United States said he was going to reject first use of nuclear weapons. He hasn't. In fact, he's supporting the buildup of nuclear weapons, the modernization. And we see that same situation everywhere. So the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists began as doomsday clock back in 1947. In 2017, they moved the hands of the doomsday clock to 2 minutes before midnight after the United States and North Korea almost went to war. In 2020, they moved it to 90 seconds before midnight, or to 100 seconds before midnight. And this year, they moved it to 90 seconds before midnight. I'm afraid it's closer than that. Putin has been making nuclear threats. They just moved nuclear weapons to Belarus, and the United States still has a first strike policy. We know that even a limited nuclear war would very likely expand into a full-scale nuclear war. We know that nuclear winter is real, that even a limited nuclear war between India and Pakistan, the experts say, with 100 nuclear weapons detonated, Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons, could lead to a partial nuclear winter in which 2 billion people would die. And that's 100 Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons. There are 12,500 in the world, and they're between 70 and 70 times as big as the Hiroshima bomb, most of them. So, we have a death wish as a civilization. And Ukraine is very dangerous. The Ukrainian counteroffensive is failing. They're getting more and more desperate. The US and the Europeans and NATO are desperate. There's very little talk of peace. The Taiwan situation gets worse. So, we need to have a real global discussion of what we do to pull back from the precipice of war and from the dangers of nuclear war. We have to do what Oppenheimer wanted to do in 1945, and that was abolish war and abolish nuclear weapons. And if the movie gets that message across, that'd be wonderful.
Okay. And during Oppenheimer times, there were a lot of scientists opposing the nuclear bomb. And since that time until now, is there a division between the scientists who are supporting the government agenda with the nuclear bomb and the scientists who are against the nuclear bomb?
Yes.
And
that divide in the scientific community really starts in the 1930s. My first book is about the politicization and radicalization of American scientists in the 1930s, where they start off as the most conservative group in society in 1930. By 1939, they're the most radical group in society. They reject war. They reject fascism. They reject government repression and the government misuse of science. But that divide has been there, as you say, since World War II. In the 1950s, the scientists were opposed to McCarthyism. In the 1960s, it's very important, nobody knows this, but the scientists were the first group in American society to oppose the U.S. invasion of Vietnam. The American Association for Advancement of Science opposed it as early as 1965. They were denouncing it. They were denouncing the chemical warfare, the use of herbicides in Vietnam. And that the group of progressive scientists has been there throughout this period. But it's not nearly as active as it was in the 1960s. And it's not nearly as outspoken as it has been at other times. So yes, there are a lot of scientists who are very strongly anti-nuclear weapons, but the Pentagon provides a lot of the funding for scientific research in America, at the universities and at think tanks and at laboratories. And so while the Pentagon is providing that funding, a lot of scientists are going to make their deal with the devil and go in there and develop these nuclear weapons. We see it at the labs, Los Alamos, Livermore, Sandia, various laboratories, but we also see it on the campuses. In the 1960s, there was a big movement against the militarization of science. And I started to write a book about that, which I have never finished because I've been working on other issues. But it's a very important story that needs to be told. Back in the 40s until 47, the United States had a Department of War and a Secretary of War. And then they changed the name in 1947 to the Secretary of Defense.
Mm-hmm.
They really need to change it. That's very Orwellian. It's a manipulation of language.
Mm-hmm.
It really is a Secretary of War. What the United States needs is to call in the Secretary of War again and to have a new cabinet position called the Secretary of Peace. We need to be spending as much time and money and energy on working toward peace as we do working toward war. We have people who spend their lives planning for a war that, if it happens, is going to end life on the planet as we know it. And that's sick. In 1929, Freud, in his book Civilization and Its Discontents, talks about the death instinct. And as a species, we have a death instinct. And we need to get rid of the means of destruction. We need to make the UN nuclear ban treaty universal. We need to abolish nuclear weapons everywhere. We need to stop supporting so much money going toward defense and militarization. We need to figure out how to work together to stop global warming and climate change. We need to figure out how a positive program for development around the world that'll raise people's standard of living, that'll increase food production, that'll end wars peacefully. We need diplomacy, not warfare. So I would love to see us abolish nuclear weapons. The Pope supports that. We go back at this conference I was just at in Italy. There was a top Vatican official who was former head of the Conference of Cardinals, and he talked about Pope John the 23rd's declaration in 1963 of Pacem in Terris, peace on earth. We've had other popes denounce nuclear weapons. Pope Francis has denounced nuclear weapons. We need to give that voice. Guterres has done the same at the United Nations. Lula is leading peace initiatives on Ukraine. Xi Jinping, the Africans. We need to be thinking about peace and how to create peace, and to be viewing things not in terms of making America great again, making Russia great again, making China great again, making India great again, making England great again. We need to have see things as part of a global community, as and to see things on a planetary basis, to plan as a planetary community of 8 billion human beings, what kind of world we want to create. You just think of how crazy it is that we now live in a world in which the richest 8 people have more wealth than the poorest 4 billion people. The richest 8 people have more wealth than half of the population on the planet. That is sick. That is really sick. We need to change these things. We can do it, but we need the willpower and leadership to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Nhat. It's great to see you in person.
Yeah, me too. I hope we can meet again soon in another topic. See you later.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.